Today we're going to be answering some of Google's most searched questions around disability.
Well, I might not be the right person to answer all these questions.
What can disabled people do? What do disabled people do all day?
So I'm just like a really boring dude.
This one's going to be fun. Where do disabled people go to jail?
I don't actually know the answer to this. Officially.
What do disabled people struggle with the most?
So that's a really interesting one.
How do disabled people have kids?
That's a spicy one.
Hello, welcome back to the Purple Goat podcast. So good last time that they brought me back on. Today
True story.
Today we're going to be answering some of Google's most searched questions around disability, and I'm going to be joined by Dom.
Hello.
Welcome back, Dom. Feel like you're always here.
Sorry. I'm always on this side as well, so people probably think it's all the same podcast, but I can assure you it isn't.
Firstly, can you please explain to me a little bit more about your disability, your kind of lived experience, so we can, verify that you're the right person to answer these most searched questions?
Well, I might not be the right person to answer all these questions. However, so I'm Dom. I was born with brittle bones, or if you're feeling fancy, otherwise known as osteogenesis imperfecta. I'll let you spell that later. Which basically means I'm of short stature, my bones break easily, I had 24 fractures when I was born. I've used a powered wheelchair all my life, ever since 2 years old. And in my kind of life and career, I moved into sort of focusing in and around doing things in the realm of disability and progressing the narrative around disability representation for the last 15 years or so. So hopefully I can answer some of your questions for you.
He's got a good CV.
I don't think I actually have a CV at the moment, which is probably a bad thing.
So first, I think the first section of this is like myths and misconceptions, but the first question is, what can disabled people do?
I feel like there's probably going to be the same kind of answer on a lot of these questions, and I mean they're going to be hilarious, I'm sure. But what can disabled people do? So obviously, as disabled people, the word essentially refers to the fact that there's some intrinsic barrier that stops you as an individual from being able to do those that others might be able to do. Obviously, that normally refers to a physicality, so something that you can't do due to some condition or impairment. The reality is, though, that the world around us has been created in such a way that there are those barriers that are put on us by society, whether that be institutional, environmental, whatever it may be. And so in reality, disabled people can do so much, but often it's the things around us that stop us from doing those things. As a teenager, I didn't really experience many barriers on me as an individual, and therefore my connection with my identity as a disabled person wasn't very strong, I suppose, because I just wasn't disabled by my life. I was totally comfortable in my own skin, in who I was, my condition, but at the same time, I was doing all the things I wanted with my mates. My parents encouraged me more than even I was kind of open to doing. They'd kind of push me to do all sorts of kind of weird and wonderful and wacky things, and that meant that there wasn't really anything I couldn't do. So I think that, we have this view that sort of disability and someone's physicality is what's kind of stopping them from being able to achieve certain things, but so often it's the things outside of that that have concocted that perception.
Nice. What a solid answer. What do disabled people do all day?
Embarrassingly, if I told you what I do all day, it won't be evident of what most disabled people do, because I just watch boring YouTube videos about coffee shops, aviation, travel,
F1,
technology, watch way too much Formula 1. So I'm just like a really boring dude. But disabled people as a whole do all the things that you other boring people in your YouTube vortex also do. We have the same desires, the same wants, the same needs. Disabled people are just people that happen to live utterly normal lives that sometimes really surprises people. But like anyone else, I love travel, I love food, I love going out with mates, I love doing sort of normal things, but I also like pushing the boundary of what I can do as well, and trying to sort of do things that maybe I wouldn't have 20 years ago thought possible or whatever as well. So I suppose that, yeah, all the normal stuff, but then also make sure as an individual I'm living for the day and living for the moment and trying not to sort of wish my days away.
Yeah. Be intentional.
Intentional.
Look at you.
I think we talked about this the other day. There was a quote from, oh God, I'm going to butcher this, aren't I? It was Jimmy Carr on another podcast. We can reference it somewhere. He was saying like almost everyone would give everything they have in 25 years' time to be where they are like 25 years before in terms of health, age, whatever. Like you would essentially, if you could turn back time and do it all again, you would give everything you had. And that's like such a powerful sort of metaphor for just actually how precious are those 25 years or whatever many years. And I suppose that as an individual, I feel like I kind of live that, breathe that in how I approach life. I try and take every opportunity and make the most of it in that way.
Yeah. It's really, it's a great perspective to have. Yeah. And generally as well, like not living as if anything is transitional and just being in it. Nice. You're going to like this one.
I like this one.
What do disabled people do for fun?
Retweet on the last one. So disabled people do all sorts of the same things that everyone else does for fun. They also don't just stay in a bubble of disabled people. They are just, shock horror, integrated into society as everyone else is, and enjoy all the same things that anyone else might enjoy in their life. So whether that be going out to restaurants, going on holidays, being with friends, shopping. I don't like shopping, but shopping. I don't go shopping for shoes. I hate shopping actually. That's probably the one thing I don't do. But yeah, everything that normal people do, apologies for the quote marks, disabled people are doing them too. And it is staggering to think that some people don't understand that. Obviously, there are certain individuals in the community that do more of one thing or less of one thing because of what they, can and, can do and what they want to do. But again, it's like everyone has free will and free choice to kind of explore the world around them in the way that works for them.
So yeah, as they should. So, next question. What do disabled people struggle with the most?
So that's a really interesting one. I would say disabled people struggle most with the institutional kind of barriers that mean that a lot of things in life just don't happen in the same way and with the same level of kind of opportunity that others might. So the workplace is a really obvious one. We don't see the same representation of disabled people in the workplace, so we know that there are intrinsic barriers. Maybe like moving the house, if you needed accessibility in your home, actually like getting the support and provision you need to have something adapted can be very difficult. It also means that people maybe struggle to go from one locality to another very easily. Like I've called it kind of the like glass walls rather than glass ceiling thing, where actually you want to go from A to B, but because of all the logistics involved in that, it becomes like inherently quite difficult and people feel essentially trapped. And then you might have, interactions into the public environment. The public perception of disability is still something that, not everyone is totally comfortable, and we're a very polite race. So the thing that I often find, I'd say maybe affects me more than anything, is if I know I'm making someone uncomfortable, I find that quite a hard experience. I'm so comfortable in my own skin, and I literally don't think about, myself and my physicality and as anything negative or anything like that ever. But then when I'm having an interaction and I can feel myself having to appease someone that is feeling uncomfortable themselves, that's an interesting interaction, and that happens all the time. And it's not necessarily from a place of malice, but it's from a place of ignorance. And so I think that the fact that we still have a lot of that, and a lot of people don't know how to interact in and around disability, that creates natural kind of barriers there to disabled people in society. I mean, I'm not going to say that there aren't like a load of things, because there are, and of course, as an individual, I'm always going to, in some ways, put a positive spin on certain things, because that's just kind of my nature. But there are obviously difficulties there, and that ultimately is why, at some shape or form, like at Purple Goat, us representing the disabled community to the world in all shapes, sizes, guises, backgrounds, ethnicities, intersectionalities, that's so powerful, because it educates people on all the different lived experiences and all the barriers that the whole community are facing on any given day.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. This is going to be an interesting one for you. Where do disabled people sit on a plane?
Not in the baggage. If that was the
implication.
The implication. So on a plane, the wheelchairs at the moment. Shout out to people like Rights on Flights that are trying to change perception of where people sit with their wheelchairs on planes. But at the moment, the wheelchair goes underneath the plane. Then you have this sort of like dance where, for someone like me, I will get transferred into an aisle chair and then brought down the aisle of the plane, and then, to be honest, sit anywhere. Although sometimes you get this interaction where they don't want you to be a fire hazard on the aisle seat, so they make you go to the window, even though that's more complicated. But then they don't want to say, we're putting you by the window because you're less likely to make the others burn in hell. So they don't like to say that bit, but that's what they really mean. It's like, they're less likely to burn if you're by the window, and they're going to get out quicker than you are, so let's do that. So I suppose the only real answer is more often near a window, but essentially anywhere you buy. So obviously not usually right at the front, unless you're balling it.
Fair. Are you balling it?
No. But if anyone wants to send me on first class flights, I will take them.
Heard it here first. Where can disabled people work?
Disabled people can work in every environment that anyone else can work in, aside from the physical limitations that would stop me being a fireman, for example. The reality is there is so much opportunity for disabled people to be more embedded into our working kind of structures and organisations and businesses and brands, and we know that there is that lack of diversity in the organisations that exist out there, and that is something fundamentally that we as an organisation want to see change, but as a community we definitely want to see change as well. As soon as people crack the idea that actually having the widest diversity of people in any given organisation gives you the best kind of outputs, and that's been understood and known for so long. If we can actually practice what we preach and make sure that that happens, we'll just start removing some of these intrinsic barriers that exist so quickly and so easily. And so for me, it's really about making people realise that, yes, we might have to put in some adjustment, like a workplace adjustment for someone, or we might need to educate someone, or whatever else it might be, or we might need to make sure someone feels comfortable by using some wording on an advert for a job, or whatever it might be. They can be such small things, but ultimately the world of opportunity of what the disabled community can contribute is so big and so wide, and we're currently doing a pretty shoddy job of actually making that happen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I kind of really hit home for me at working at PG is that like you're saying is the only barriers there really are to disabled people being able to do all the things that they want to do or can do, and all these things is the barriers that are put in place by non-disabled people, just institutions, or just like that systemic kind of barrier, as opposed to it being like something intrinsic with disabled people that make them be like unable to do things.
A really simple example of that is, so I used to work in TV production, and pretty much on the first day, I think, or one of the first days that I was in this company, I went to Royal Ascot for a live broadcast of Royal Ascot, and got put in a OB truck, so a broadcast sort of truck with, you know, all the feeds and all the directors and producers, everyone there. But I had to be lifted out my chair, up some stairs and put in the truck. And that instantly that day, I knew I wasn't going to be a live TV director or producer, because the equipment is not designed in a way that I was able to actually utilise it. So, you know, it wasn't going to be practical for me into later life that I would always rely on someone to lift me into a truck. Like, they do exist, and there are accessible trucks, but it's not the norm. Yeah. But why aren't these spaces in the same way that if we design a building, we make sure it's got accessibility nowadays? You know, something like a sort of broadcast truck, absolutely, like, that can have the same provision put into it. Similarly, the actual gear in that space, you know, are we making sure that things can do live captions for those that actually work in that environment? Or are we only expecting those that don't need live captions to use that equipment? You know, it's those kind of considerations as well, not just the physical spaces, but the technology that we're interacting with in our working environment, that also kind of, essentially, there's a duty there to start implementing more natural accessibility and inclusivity into everything that people interact with.
Yeah, 100%. And because at the end of the day, it just makes it better for everyone. Even having, for example, an accessible truck where if it does like lift you, it could be used to lift equipment, other people, you know, it's
exactly.
Just the whole thing.
Inclusive design.
This one's going to be fun. Where do disabled people go to jail?
We've actually talked about this quite recently, didn't we?
Yeah.
I don't actually know the answer to this. Like, you know, officially, all I can assume is that if I got convicted of a heinous crime, I'd have to go somewhere that is kind of more akin to a sort of glorified hotel, because I'd need a lot of support.
Yeah.
So I just assume that I'll be in some kind of like high security care facility, where I reckon just guessing that the coffee's going to be better there than it would be in jail. So I don't actually know, but the reality is, like, I couldn't exist in a normal jail, I don't think.
Yeah.
I've been through a dinner in a jail once.
Oh.
The Clink restaurant, where they've created a training program for like chefs in the prison, and then they train them in the skills, so then when they come out of prison, they something like 90% more employment opportunities, and less and like 10 times less reoffending, because these people have like got distinct skills that they've been trained in, and then they can go straight into a job. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's cool.
And the meal was great, but it was very unusual being in the prison for the meal. I think it was Brixton Prison.
Very fair.
But yeah, that was an experience, but not one that I'd like to be back on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that makes sense. No plans.
100%.
No plans just yet.
Yeah, have you seen those comparisons of like a uni hall and then a prison cell, and then sometimes the uni hall will be worse.
Yeah.
Than a
I can
prison
believe
cell.
that. Yeah, I can definitely believe that.
Okay, how do disabled people drive?
Yeah, cool question. So the reality is there are so many different ways that disabled people can drive. Often even the individuals themselves might not know that there is provision out there for how they are able to drive themselves. So I have had a Motability vehicle since 2005, 2006, something like that. And it's honestly like the day before I passed my test, I was the most nervous. I don't really get nervous about that many things in my life. I was so nervous. I didn't really sleep the night before because I just knew the power of the independence that passing my driving test would give me as an individual. And the car I learned on was the car that was provided by Motability. So I had to wait for that car to like arrive and be ready before I could learn because my hand controls are so specialist. So I don't know whether you can sort of envisage this or see this, but I've got an accelerator and a brake in my left hand. It's the other way to what you think in your head it would be. It's not accelerate, brake. It's the other way around because if you hit something, you don't want to accelerate into it. So they do it so forward is brake. And then on the top of that, I've got like a button that sort of cycles around different functions and you press it a different amount of times. So like wipers, lights, that kind of thing. And then in the right hand, I've got steering. And then I've got sort of two kind of display things. One does the sort of gears. It's an automatic, but drive, park, all of that jazz. And then over there is sort of the functions that you don't need every day. But it's really, really cool. And like, even though, so I'm now on my second vehicle, probably about to go for my third, even though like the technology right now is probably similar to that I had 20 years ago. I drive from the chair as well. So I go up the lift at the back through the car, and then my seat becomes the seat of the car, if that makes sense. And even though I've had that same kind of technology in the last 20 years, like people are still absolutely mesmerised by seeing me drive. I've had people on motorways just like drive past me and then I see them slow down because they want another look. And that's like a really common thing because they just see me and they're probably like, oh my God, is he driving? But it is like absolutely amazing what's possible. Like my controls, yes, they're quite sort of a lot there, but actually like there's also all sorts of other controls, people that can control a car just from certain muscles on their face or their head, and it's quite incredible the technology that is out there. So all I can say is like if you feel that driving might be for you or you'd want to explore what's possible, then like do speak to Motability and see if that's an option for you. Similarly, if you're not eligible for Motability, then do talk to kind of adaptation companies and see what just the remit of possibility might be for you as an individual, because it is awesome being driving.
Hashtag not an ad or
Hashtag not an ad,
just a genuine user.
But as a disclaimer, we have worked with Motability in the past.
Look at us hitting all the right things. Actually, another question I have on driving, could you have another wheelchair user in as a passenger in your car?
Technically yes, but they would have to have the same locking system that I have at the bottom of my chair. So there's a mechanism underneath my chair where if I drive my wheelchair over the locking system, it clamps in automatically, and then I press a button and then that releases the car. So technically if the car did a somersault, my chair would stay in the car.
Okay, that makes sense.
Not sure whether I would, but the chair would.
Ooh, how do disabled people exercise?
Not enough. No, genuinely, again, disabled people absolutely can exercise, do exercise, should exercise. Like, I definitely used to exercise a hell of a lot more than I do now. You might not believe it, but when I was 11 years old, I shuffled a mile on my bum for charity, 2 hours. And like every lunchtime at school before that, I would do about half a mile in training for a couple of months.
That's so cool. Did you not get like friction burns?
I broke off my femur.
Oh, but I didn't know. A big bone to break.
I didn't know at the time, but I fractured my femur doing it. Oh, no. But that almost started the chain of events where like, I mean, we're not going to do a sort of anatomy show here, but I've got like giant knees, and it meant that like shuffling as I got older, they essentially, my bones are deformed and they go in weird and wonderful places over time, but like my knees have got sort of to a size where actually then shuffling on my bum became more difficult, and so like that I was sort of whizzing around on my bum everywhere until I was about 15 years old, and then just naturally as I sort of gained more independence and went to university and things like that, spent more time in a wheelchair. So 14-year-old Dom, 13-year-old Dom literally just like lived on the floor, and if you went into my room, you'd probably have got vertigo because like everything's low down. You feel like you're in like the borrowers or something. But that is that's how I live my life. And then I only transferred into my chair when I wanted to leave the house. So that's kind of definitely changed, and as such, that has meant that I, as an individual, don't exercise much as I used to for sure. I love to swim when I literally am bothered to make the time for it. Literally, I've had the conversation this week about going swimming more with Sophie. I've used to do a lot of like weights as well, so like I do quite a lot of hand weights. But saying all of that, Danny, shout out to Danny, she's a qualified PT.
Yeah.
I genuinely am like, I want Danny to give me a regime,
Yeah.
put me through my paces, and then we'll see this miraculous transformation into someone that resembles Mr.
Yeah.
Olympia in, in a matter of weeks.
Yeah. We'll send Danny this clip.
The only serious point I'll make is, from my experience, like gyms and things like that historically have not been particularly inclusive places. I know that you talked about on your kind of chat with Danny before, but I've been to go to gyms and like, oh hey, can I just have the swimming membership? And there's such a like computer says no moment of like, no, we don't do that. We just do the full. And you're like, well, I don't really want to spend the tens and tens and tens of pounds a month on this full gym membership with this and this and this, when actually I'm literally going to use the pool, which if you broke it down would be much less. And so that lack of flexibility there for actually catering to what individuals want and need can be frustrating. The one thing I will say is like, over time, the conversation has got better around including disabled people in the conversation. So in the way that we see more disabled creators represented in campaigns from sort of sportswear brands, that's really important. People want to be able to be seen in these environments. Obviously, we've got the Paralympics and things like that again show that for disabled people, sport is equally as important as it is to everyone else. It just, for any individual, they're going to just have their way of making sure that they're partaking in sport and exercise. And we all know the value of doing that. So, of course, it's important. And it's just hopefully down to these companies to help us make that happen.
Yeah. And if you need our help, you know where we are.
You know where we are.
Next one is, how do disabled people feel?
Honestly, it's a great one, because the reality is that we have had this perception, and we talked about it in an earlier vlog. Like, we've had this perception that disabled people are intrinsically sad and they are to be pitied and life is not good. Of course, as we've spoken about, like, there are barriers there are things to work through, there are difficulties that those without disabilities are not facing, and I'm not going to diminish any of those. But at the same time, it's sometimes incomparable to people that disabled people's life can be positive, can be enjoyable, can be fun, and dare I say it, I wouldn't change who I was for the world. And some people really almost like struggle with that, because they're like, what? That doesn't align with what I've seen in the media. So I think that we, again, like a Purple Go, what we are trying to do all day, every day, is show the rounded view of disability and the nuance that's part of that. Like, you can be disabled and have an incredibly enjoyable, forward-thinking, positive life. And yes, you'll take the difficulties with the awesome moments, but like, doesn't everyone do that in different guises? So I think that it's just important for us to realise, like, but more than anything, we're all human, and that's first and foremost. And then, the disability bit, for most people, is just a, like, secondary part of the conversation.
Yeah. Last one on this section is, how do disabled people have kids?
That's a spicy one. That's good.
Finishing on a...
Yeah. So, disabled people can be parents too. Obviously, to have kids, the birds and the bees has to happen. Firstly, that's very possible for a lot of disabled people. And again, it's amazing how fascinated that people in the general public are about, like, the mechanics of how disabled people have sex. And you're like, why would you be that interested, depending on who it is, in the same way that you wouldn't ask someone what their preferences were or
Yeah.
whatever, you know what I mean? So like that side of things is kind of almost a side question. And if you know someone really well and you're their best mate, like, of course, like you'll, well, no, you wouldn't even ask. Like, yeah, I don't even know. But at the same time, like the reality is, disabled people have the same wants, needs, desires, as you said before, like than anyone else. There's people with that maternal instinct that want to become parents and do become parents. There's people that just want to get out there and date a lot and do all of that stuff, and also that's awesome. There can be considerations around certain disabilities when it comes to genetics and things like that, and of course everyone has like the choice to do what they want when it comes to like family planning and whatever. So again, there's kind of intrinsic barriers in place for certain people around it, and that's just something for them to kind of work through. But it doesn't mean that is not something that's possible. It's just about like knowing all the options of what's out there and then working out what is right for you as an individual. Like that kind of thing, like family planning is just such a personal thing for all of us, whether you're disabled or not, that actually we just need to respect the sort of choices of individuals and how they go about that process. But the same wants, needs, desires exist in all of us, and that is also perfectly possible for almost all of us as well. So it's amazing how little of that is talked about though, because it's just like, it's almost like some people can't compute the combination of disability and like sex in a conversation, and they're like, whoa, no, that's like overload of kind of progressive tonality. But the reality is like, it's happening all day, every day, wherever you are in the world. We are all human.
There you go. I think that's been like the main takeaway, without putting words in your mouth about asking you to summarize, but we are just all human, and like there are very many ways to do different things, and it's just about finding those different avenues. Just because your way of doing something might look a little bit different to the way I might have to do something doesn't mean that it's not right or it shouldn't be happening or any of those things.
Amen.
Amen. Okay, so last question for us to wrap up is, aside from all of these, what are some of the most common misconceptions and stereotypes about disability that you've encountered, and how can we go about debunking and challenging them, but then how do you personally go about them?
I'm not that good at remembering all the sort of misconceptions that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. One that we haven't covered is that like I've got a sort of infantile perspective of the world, because A, I'm small, but B, I'm disabled. I will get people come up to me and talk to me as if I'm a child. And again, like it's from a place of ignorance, but it's one where I thoroughly enjoy the interaction. Like 99% of the time, I enjoy the interaction of seeing someone have their kind of world spun around a little bit when I sort of, essentially challenge their misconceptions around disability, and you can see it, like it's a thing, and it's really powerful when you are able to do that. So maybe I'm kind of just a bit sick there, like I'm good with that bit of it, but it is true that most of the time, we all have that certain like bad days or days that we don't want to do certain things, and in the same way, not every day has to be a day that you're a teacher of disability to other people. It's absolutely fine if you don't want to be that, but at the same time, those little moments can be quite powerful, where you sort of are teaching someone about a misconception or a preconception that they might have of you as an individual. I think it goes into all sorts of things, like they'll assume that Sophie, my partner, is a carer. That's really, really common. They'll assume that I am not going to work. So if I'm on a train going somewhere, like, "You're going anywhere nice today?" And like it's 8:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, and like, well, I wouldn't normally choose to be on a train at 8:30 on a Tuesday unless I was actually going to work. That kind of thing. I mean, like, obviously it's an untold amount. It's like all day, every day, there are certain interactions where that you're having this moment where you're like challenging someone's preconception of what disability is. But similarly, I know how I live and experience disability is different to other people. So I don't want to say that, like, you know, everyone should not think, well, everyone should think that my experience is the norm, because again, I know it isn't. I know I have certain privileges. I know that I'm lucky in so many ways around who I am and what I do. And so, I wouldn't for 1 second want people to not think that the wider world out there experiences it in other ways as well.
Yeah. Okay. I lied. It's not the last one. So looking ahead, what do you hope to achieve in terms of greater acceptance, accessibility, and inclusions for everyone with disabilities?
I, more than anything, and we touched on it earlier, like, I would like to create a world where everyone is incredibly comfortable around all aspects of disability, and everyone is treated, equitably. Everyone is given the opportunity to thrive, but in that kind of way of framing it in and around comfort, I think that if we can make those we interact with comfortable and educated and give them insight, if we can make the organisations that exist in this world understand the needs of different communities, if everyone's going to have this baseline knowledge, then the reality of making an inclusive world becomes incredibly straightforward in some ways. I know that that's like a huge sweeping statement, but the reality is like, if you had the community in every space and place and group and everywhere in society, you just naturally have the people there that can help shape to make it sure it's accessible, because they're the people that you're helping shape it for. And that sounds like a really like obvious but yet oversimplified reality, but it's true. Like, in the same way that we just have men and women equally in society, as equally as we've got to, and there's still work to be done, of course, but like, that's not even a consideration now in our minds, and well, for anyone that we would care to talk to. But the reality is, like, disability can go that same way, where everyone has the same comfort around all people, and they're not thinking, oh, I'm talking to a woman now, I'm not talking to a man. Like, that concept is crazy, but like, but that's where it kind of probably was however many centuries ago. And so that's kind of ultimately where I'd love to go, and what we do at PG, helping shape that comfort, confidence, empowerment in those that we talk to and that we talk with.
Yeah, thank you, Dom, so much for answering the Google's most searched questions and letting us know that, in fact, disabled people do feel, have fun, have children, fly,
and have embarrassing YouTube search histories,
as all of us do, I'm sure. And yeah, also thank you to ID Studios for having us, and for having us in their space that is incredibly inclusive and accessible. And yeah, thank you so much to you for watching and listening.
Thank you.
Catch
Have
you
a
in the
great
next
day.
one.